Welcome everyone. My name is Jermaine Wooten. Myself, along with attorney Gerald Christmas, we are the attorneys that represent the Myers family. I know many of you may say, why do they need attorneys? They need attorneys for one reason only. When I met the Myers family, they had nothing but questions. They wanted to know. They had gone to the police department. They had really not gotten any answers. Throughout the stories being printed via press, they got very inconsistent answers. And many of these answers were via the police department. So shortly thereafter, they came to me, placed me under retainer and said, Mr. Wu, we just want answers. We want to find out what happened to our baby boy. And many folks in St. Louis have lacked the trust in St. Louis Police Department. So therefore we wanted and we had to conduct our own autopsy. So here we stand today.
As part of my prefatory remarks, that I have not seen the medical examiner's report. That is very important when you're going to do a second autopsy. And I understand it's not yet ready. I have no criticism of that. Vonderritt Myers was shot 8 times. 6 of these gunshot wounds were fired posteriorly, that is the back of Mr. Myers. 6 of these shots struck him on the back part, the posterior aspect of his body. Only 2 shots struck him somewhat in the front, and they were not direct frontal shots. 1 shot struck him on the face, on the right side, essentially between the lateral margin of the eyebrow and the ear. If you take your finger and just kind of go midway between your ear, the top of your ear, and the eyebrow, that's where that bullet wound was located. So it's on the right side of his face. The other shot that struck him somewhat on the front was one of the shots that hit him on his left leg. And that shot also is somewhat to the side. It's pretty much in the middle of the left thigh, and it's what we call anterolateral, anterior lateral toward the side. So it's frontal in part, but not a direct frontal shot. 6 other shots struck him in the rear. 3 of these shots hit him in the back of his right thigh. One was just below the inferior rim of the right buttock. Another one down from there a little bit, and a third one farther down a little bit toward the inner aspect of the thigh, but above the knee joint. So those were 3 shots fired, striking him in his right thigh posteriorly. Then Mr. Myers was struck 3 times on his left leg, 2 on the thigh, 1 on the calf. The one on the thigh was fairly high up, but above the mid-level. Another one was farther down, but above the popliteal fossa, that's the back of the knee joint, above that. And the third one farther down on the left calf. Those the 6 shots that struck him in the rear, 3 essentially on the right leg and 3 on the left leg. And of those 6 shots, as I say, and it's important to keep in mind, they are all in a postero-anterior direction. So those are the 8 wounds. 5 bullets were recovered from the 8 shots of entrance. 3 of them exited the body. The exit wounds were located, just one of them by the right groin, another one on the lateral aspect of the right knee. That was from the bullet that entered in the back, just above the knee joint on the right side, and another exited on the calf. Now, I cannot tell you with bullets that were recovered exactly where they were recovered, but based upon the diagram, based upon my findings, then I can have a pretty good idea of where they would have been recovered. What is important to note is that there were no wounds of the thorax and abdomen. The sternum, the breastplate, the rib cage is completely intact with no fractures. The vertebral column is completely intact with no fractures or dislocations. And as far as I can see, the pelvic bones, we call them the innominate bones. Your iliac crest is one part of that. The symphysis pubis, where the bones meet in the front. Those are bones. The back part, they join with the lower vertebral column, and they appear to be intact. It was not necessary, nor was there equipment available anyway to take x-rays. But I found no evidence of fractures in those areas. And in looking at the organs that have been previously removed and dissected, I see no evidence to suggest that any of them were perforated by bullets. So we are dealing then with one wound of the head and 7 wounds of the legs. What is extremely important to note, how it plays out and how it will be viewed and considered and analyzed and correlated with forensic scientific investigators who presumably were at the scene, with other investigators that may have been retained by counsel, and so on, eyewitness interviews and their accounts. I can give you only my findings from a forensic scientific standpoint. And there are, in addition to the point that I have made, and I reiterated deliberately, and not because I've forgotten that I stated it, but I think it's extremely important in understanding this case that 6 of the 8 gunshot wounds were directed posteriorly. They struck Mr. Myers on the rear part of his body. And the other 2 shots were frontal, but toward the side, not directly frontal. The head wound would have rendered Vonderritt immediately unconscious. This wound broke the calvarium, that's the top part of the skull called the calvarium, produced fractures, and those fractures then continue along the floor of the skull. We call that the basilar skull, the bony floor upon which the brain rests. There was extensive shattering of those bones on the right side, the bullet entering, as I told you, off to the side of the eye, moving then from front to back, from right to left, and as far as I can tell, with no significant up or down deviation. The brain would have been extensively damaged. There is no way in the world that Vonderritt would have been able to talk, move, think, act, or do anything at all once that head wound was sustained. It would have rendered him immediately unconscious, incapable of any kind of voluntary action, including, of course, the ability to speak. So that must be kept in mind, I think, as an extremely important finding. Another very important finding is that the gunshot wound, which I told you, struck him about mid-thigh on the left leg, anterolateral. That wound shattered the femur. The long bone, the biggest bone in the body, from our hip joint to our knee, the femur, obviously, is essential to locomotion. That bullet broke the femur, not just a simple fracture, not even a mildly displaced fracture, but it shattered the femur. And the autopsy, pieces of bone, sorry, I don't mean to make this more of an agony for the family, but I want you to understand that bone was shattered. Once that wound was sustained, there is no way, in my opinion, that Vonderritt would have been able to move. Not like I have a broken arm and I'll hobble along, or I maybe even have a mildly displaced fracture of the leg. This was a shattering of the femur. He would have been incapable of moving. It would have dropped him to the ground. The pain would have been immense, and of course pain from all the other wounds. This would have been extremely painful, and most importantly, would have rendered him incapable, in my opinion, of moving. You don't just drag your leg around. A third very interesting and important finding is that some of the wounds have a significant upward direction. This wound, which I have just discussed, that shattered the femur, that had entered on the anterolateral aspect of the mid portion of the left thigh, that bullet was recovered higher up toward the left hip area. So that bullet had a significant upward direction. I've told you about a gunshot wound of entrance on the left calf down below the mid portion. That bullet traveled upward and exited. It was essentially a tangential wound which burrowed under the subcutaneous adipose tissue, not striking bone or not even destroying muscles to any significant degree. That wound had a significant upward direction. The two wounds that entered on the back of his upper right thigh, I told you beneath the buttock level, both of those wounds had a somewhat upward direction. And then three of the other wounds, more or less horizontally, not completely so, but with no significant vertical deviation. So these are the findings. Maybe I can show these on a mannequin if you would like. Pardon me?
There's no frontal shots. There's no evidence that would indicate that there was a gun battle going on, that this officer was shooting him from a forward position. He was shooting him from the back. And that's why we brought in somebody else, so that we could get to the bottom of what happened. Because these parents deserve to know why their only child is dead. They need an explanation from beginning to end as to what happened. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to find out from beginning to end. And we're open to entertain questions now.
Legs and fallen in some way for the final two shots in the front.
Yes, he could not have run once that femoral fracture occurred, and he could not have run or done anything once the head wound was sustained. And so I think the other wounds would have preceded those because he then fell. He would have fallen.
So, doctor, does it seem then like he turned back around to get those final two shots?
Yeah, you mean, so I'm running, and let me see, so I'm running from you like this, and I turn around and shot. That's possible, except you see, there's not that kind of upward trajectory as someone is still, down below the hill. If he were on top of the hill and he was on the same level as Vonderritt, and he shot him then, but the problem with that is that Vonderritt should not have been moving, because in that scenario, that fracture of the femur would have already occurred, with the head wound being the last wound. But there's no way that he could have been moving once the femoral fracture occurred. So that doesn't fit in.
But the shot that caused the femoral fracture did not have the same upward direction as
Oh,
those
it has a significant upward direction.
So
It
the-
comes in here, antero a little bit to the side, about the mid portion of the thigh, and it's recovered up higher toward the hip.
So he's shot at the back of the legs going up the hill. He
Yeah.
starts to turn at the top of the hill, gets the shot that fractures the femoral bone.
He has to drop at that point.
And as he's on the ground, the
he
officer
can't
can-
hobble. It's not a matter of just it's a total dead weight.
The final shot while he's on the ground.
And that would be consistent with
I said it would be.
witnesses have told us.
I'm not making that statement. Somebody asked, and you got the scenario that the attorneys believe, and but at this point, I can only say what the facts are in terms of now, because I'm not, what did the witnesses say, the number of shots, was there a final shot, did they hear him talking, and so on. I can only tell you what the gunshots present to me in terms of the trajectory, the angularity.
Can I ask you, please, in front of the microphone, Dr. It's a complex case, and as you said at the beginning, you're not going to issue any conclusions today. But just boil down your preliminary findings. What is your main message here today of your insights versus what the official police version is?
Well, I don't know what the official police version is. I'm not in St. Louis. I have followed the case a little bit. It hasn't gotten a great deal of attention in my area, like Michael Brown. But my conclusions are that 6 of 8 shots were definitely fired with with Vonderritt Myers back toward the policeman. They were fired in a posterior, anterior direction. That's number one. Number two, the fracture of the femur, the shot to the left thigh would have rendered him capable of moving after that shot was sustained. The shot to the head would have dropped him immediately, rendered him completely unconscious, totally immobile, and unable to speak or make any sounds or noises of any kind. That the shots, 4 of them, 2 with a very significant upward direction, 2 others with somewhat of an upward direction, fit in very logically with a scenario of Vonderritt Myers running away from the officer, moving up the hill onto the level, they call it a gangway, as I saw today, the space between 2 houses, with the officer not only behind him, but lower down, firing as Vonderritt was moving away from him at a higher level.
Is there anything to prevent, in your conclusions, the scenario where Vonderritt potentially fired some shots, turned his back, was running away, was shot 6 times, turned around again and was shot fatally?
Well, first of all, as far as whether Vonderritt had a gun and fired, that's not for me to say. I've read about that. I'm not telling you that I don't know anything about that. But I'm not going to make any comment on that because I don't know, and I know there's some question about the gun. Where is it? Whose gun was it? How did Vonderritt ever come in possession of the gun? I don't know. So I won't comment on that. So whether is it possible for him to have fired a shot? So yeah, is it possible for him to been to dinner or gone to a movie or a play or I not being facetious, but I have no way of knowing what took place before. That'll be for everybody to work out investigatively from the 2 sides. But back to the other part of your question, and then finally being shot in the head, I addressed that to the question that was asked. The head wound does not fit in with the officer shooting from the lower level. It doesn't, because it does not have any upward direction. In fact, based upon the sketch I have seen, it might even have had some slightly downward trajectory. The bullet entered here, between the eyebrow, and the diagram I've seen shows the bullet recovery. And remember, this is just 2-dimensional, but the X was placed in what we call the left occipital region. Occipital, is the back of the head. and a little bit lower down. Nothing to indicate that the bullet came in and, went up over the top of the head. What I've seen, I can't tell, but what I've seen, it indicates that the bullet, if anything, moved slightly downward within the head and not upward.
Mr. Lee, you said earlier that you think that one of the scenarios you think is that femur shot could have been 4 or 8.
Between 4 and 8, but I'm not,
Oh,
it's just me speculating.
Now, if it was 4,
Not 8. Not 8. It
I'm
could
sorry,
possibly been.
four.
It could have
It could
also
have been
been
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
one of those shots. I think we're confident that the last shot was the shot to the head, based on what witnesses stated that they heard Vonderritt squirming and screaming. And so, based on what the doctor has told us, that he would not have been able to speak after the head shot, and it's a clear indication that probably the head shot was the last shot. And then the other witnesses have identified that while Vonderritt was running from the officer, that he was shot in the leg and he went down. So that means that coincides with what the science is telling us, that femur was ruptured and there's no way he could have been standing still. It coincides with what the witnesses are saying, that he threw his, he was shot in the leg, he went down to one knee and said, I stopped. And he went on down. Now, those other shots to the leg may have come earlier, but we definitely know that that shot would have dropped him, and we know that the shot to the head would have silenced him. So any noise that was occurring from him would have had to been before the shot to the head, and at least he would have probably already been on the ground.
now, legally, while it doesn't look good to have somebody be shot in the back, it's a little more complicated than that legally, isn't it? Particularly for a police officer.
Say that one more time.
Well, it doesn't look good to be shot in the back.
Well-
Legally, it's more complicated than that for a police officer, isn't it?
When you say legally, tell me what you mean.
Well, some of the illegal issues that have arisen since the Michael Brown shooting, lawyers, criminologists.
Oh,
have
clearly,
spoken
yes.
about.
Legally, it would be a problem for the police officer to have to be shooting, Vonderritt from the back and to be shooting him in the head when he's on the ground. It would be quite naturally. And quite frankly, I'm assuming what you're saying is that coming behind the Mike Brown shooting, to have that kind of evidence come out would be a major legal problem and a major disruption of this city.
And some of the lawyers after Michael Brown told us, if an officer is pursuing, there's a Supreme Court case on Michael Brown. If an officer is pursuing somebody he believes to have committed a felony, and the police version of this is that he fired first.
When we have one of these police shootings, we need a totally separate entity to come in and take control of that scene so that we can have some confidence in what's going on.
Hold on, Robert. But secondly, we're making the assumption that Vonderritt had a gun. The witnesses stated he did not have a gun. Secondly, the DNA report from the gun that they recovered does not have any of Vonderritt's DNA on it. So it's very consistent with him not having a gun.
And also, if you look at the mannequin, I find it very hard to believe that Vonderritt is facing the officer, and they're in a gun battle, and he has no frontal wounds. That seems very difficult to me to believe based on his story. And I know our police officers are better shots than that. That he's going to be standing facing him, and he's steadily shooting at him, and the officer standing right there facing him from the front, shooting him, and we have no frontal injuries at all. I have not seen that in my years as a defense attorney and as a prosecutor. I just have never seen that happen. That you in direct gunfire with an officer and no frontal wounds.
Mr. Riker, or Dr. Riker, I hate to belabor this, just for the layman, can you summarize, what doesn't, if you're saying this, what doesn't look right about this shooting? From a clinical standpoint.
Well, I don't know what more to say. Well, I'll comment as a forensic pathologist, as a coroner for 20 years who held public hearings, inquests in every police-related shooting. and to dealing with cases all around the country and around the world. What troubles me is this. You asked a question, the gentleman here, about legal. I thought that you're supposed to think that your life is in imminent danger or the life of a third party. And he mentions a felony. What kind of a felony? Yeah, a murder, somebody that is going to be doing something to somebody else. What is a felony? A felony, I could come up and smack you in the face, that's a felony. Is that, you think you could shoot me? Let's say, I mean, you know, felony is a felony like everything else. There's first degree murder, and then there's a felony because your wife got pissed off at you, and she called the cops and says that you hurled the pizza at her and said, can't you do a better job? You know, that could be a felony too, right? Depends on how much she wants to press charges against you to get out of marriage. I mean, there are felonies and there are felonies. But what troubles me is the shooting that continues with wild abandon and the comment that has been made too. You know, this is not a Hollywood movie. This is not Clint Eastwood or one of the other guys, boy, I'm going to shoot your right hand. I'm going to shoot you in the knee. When one day, when a cop starts shooting, you shoot to kill. When you feel it's necessary to shoot and there's a danger, you shoot to kill. You don't kill by shooting in the legs. You kill by shooting in the chest. You go for the heart, for the lungs, that's what you go for. I'm puzzled here by the absence of any thoraco-abdominal wounds. I'm very puzzled by that. This is an officer I understand has been on duty on the force for several years. Why are all these shots in the leg? In going to the scene, you know, he is running away. Now you get into the whole question of what is he running from and the business with the gun. That'll play out as beyond my involvement, but I'm answering your question. I happen to be an attorney too. I'm not here as an attorney, but I know a little bit about this stuff. And you don't just say, well, an officer has a right to shoot because there was a felony. What felony? I can pee on the floor here, that could be made into a felony. Destruction of property and so on, that goes above, can go above a misdemeanor. You going to shoot me for that? Well, you know, what kind of felony? I don't know the background here. Well, what did Vonderritt do? Where was the police officer coming from? Why was he there? And these are things that the attorneys will deal with.
And I think those are the questions that we're still trying to get answers to. As we indicated, we want answers as to what happened in this case from beginning to end. And I think what the doctor raised is some important questions. You know, why was he pursuing Vonderritt? What was going on? What action did he see? Why didn't he call for backup? Why was he going into a gangway? I mean, these are things that obviously these officers are not being trained correctly, because these are things that they should not be doing, not only for the safety of the public, but for the safety of themselves. They should be trained not to do these things. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered from beginning to end, and these parents deserve those answers. They need to know why they have to bury their son this weekend, and they need to answer, and parents are entitled to that. You're entitled to know. I'm a parent, many of you are probably parents. If your child ended up deceased, you want to know, right, wrong, or indifferent, what happened. Nobody could just tell you a story and say, you just be satisfied with this and don't ask us any more questions. That's not appropriate. This was a human being. This was an 18-year-old that had plenty of life. As the doctor indicated, he was a perfectly healthy young man. We don't know what he could have inspired to be. So we need some answers from beginning to end.
Services are going to be held here this weekend?
We'll let the family deal with that.
Sir, was this gangway where they might have had a
Executive
confrontation?
Let's say this. We're done. Dr. Webb, he has to go. He has a flight to catch. I hope you guys got the information that you guys were looking for by Dr. Webb. He came here, gave you guys a wealth of information. He was very candid, very consistent. And that's kind of what we're looking for from the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. Candid, consistent investigation and complete investigation.